Okay, so we're going to take another go at this, at the Transcendental Aesthetic and the second analogy, because, well, in preparation for Schopenhauer. So the plan is next time we'll start Schopenhauer. I forget exactly how far we're going to read next time, but you can look at the reading guide. So we kind of went through this last time, and well, we didn't really go through this. We just talked about, Kant's epistemology in super broad terms without digging into many of the details. So, I thought maybe we should kind of go through at least parts of this more systematically, and then Alistair recommended that we focus on these, in the Transcendental Aesthetic on these first pages. So I'm not sure how to proceed unless, my inclination is just to literally start working through the text, and then just bring up opportunities for, and just let people comment, question, clarify as needed. Does anybody have any other preferred place to start? Okay, well, so this is on page 172 at the very beginning of the Transcendental Aesthetic. I guess maybe a way to attack this is, there's all these bold terms in here. So what does he mean by intuition, sensibility, and then appearance? And then later at the bottom and on the next page, he fits those into a discussion of matter and form. So I was actually just looking at the intuition. I thought a lot of these things, I think I had a fair kind of at least a rough grasp on them. And then I go look at things like that Kant dictionary or go look at other resources, and I think I don't understand them as well as I thought. So anyone want to take a stab at intuition?
So intuition, if I understand it correctly, is like this immediate, or maybe even perhaps a better way of saying it is like non-mediated, knowledge, essentially, that is, oh man, I'm really botching this. Okay. It's like a non-mediated knowledge. Yeah, I don't know what else to say from there. It's like, that's all the words that'll come out of my mouth. I'm sorry. I'm floundering. It's the way that we grasp the world in concrete, particular instances as opposed to abstract. I think maybe that's a better way of putting it. I don't know if that's 100% accurate, but.
Yeah, I think that's right. What I say to my undergraduates, it's not super accurate, but it's okay, is an intuition is a spatiotemporal particular. So not concerned. Particular was, I think that's a correct word, and not mediated, but in particular not mediated by concepts. I don't know if there's any analytic philosophers among you, but this is has been broached in the past 10 or 15 years in terms of, in the analytic tradition, in terms of non-conceptual content. So I don't understand that debate. I'm just like, oh, you're talking about Kant.
So so an intuition does not yet count as knowledge. Would that be correct?
No, I think it's cognition.
It is? Okay.
I don't know, actually. I think there's debate in the Kant literature, which it doesn't make sense for us to get into, about whether you can have an experience, whether you can actually have an experience of something that's not conceptually mediated. So there's a question about whether it's a theoretical construct or whether you can actually have these things. And I don't know. I think once you've got the idea, I don't think it matters too much. It's fun to think about that, but I don't think it matters too much for understanding the text. I immediately said yes, because Schopenhauer thinks that intuitions are cognitive. So
yeah, I thought that was a difference between them, though. I thought that because, from
Maybe.
the little bit I've read of Schopenhauer, I've only read the first couple of reading selections, and he says, I mean, he at least uses the word intellectual intuition, right? Because he thinks that Schopenhauer seems to think that when we understand, that we actually are understanding something sort of immediately, whereas I thought, and maybe that, I thought that intuition was something that was sort of an abstraction, so that I have an experience of a particular, and that particular is a processed representation, that it is a processed intuition, processed by space, time, the concepts of the understanding, and that intuition was something more primary than that, to which I do not have direct access. But that was what again,
Right. I'm also reading for Kant that intuition is not yet cognition, and we need at least the table of categories for experience.
Yeah, I think that's a reasonable reading. I mean, I don't really follow the Kant literature. It's too complicated and there's too much of it. But I would say that's probably the majority interpretation of Kant. But I feel a little bit like it's worth resisting because of that majority interpretation of Kant is of course a reproduction of the taking up of Kant in that tradition of German idealism that then very much emphasized the concept. And Schopenhauer opens up a different path, and perhaps also a different path to understanding Kant. But I don't think a whole lot. I mean, there's so much difficult stuff going on in Kant. I think it's okay. You can say, yeah, I see there's a debate there. That's great. Good job. Fine. I would say, Nevitt, that there's, so I think just in terms of vocabulary, intuitions are spatiotemporal. So there's Horkheimer uses this famous factory analogy for Kant that experience is a product. It's like a piece of capitalist engineering. I was just reading that article recently. It's hilarious. And it's I don't know. I mean, shouldn't trust the Frankfurt School on anything, but I find it a helpful metaphor. And in terms of that metaphor, there's a series of production stages, and the at the very bottom, the like raw material, that's these things called sensations, right? Which he gets from the empiricist tradition, and those are. But here's where he deviates from the empiricist tradition. Those are not spatiotemporal, whatever that means.
Sensations are not?
Sensations, they must not be, because the difference between an intuition and a sensation is that intuitions have gone through this first process, and the only available machines for effecting that first process are space and time.
So when
sensations are not spatiotemporal.
When he talks about the manifold of sensation, then that's that pre-processed.
Pre-processed. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so the manifold of sensation would that be uncontroversially non-cognitive, and something that you can talk about, that you can infer, but you can't experience?
Yeah, Kant is not very good about making that distinction. I don't think so. He just often, I mean, I think it's Hume he's reading, and Hume doesn't make that distinction. And I think there's still I don't know. To me, it makes a lot of sense of the text if you think they're not really thinking, for Hume as well, they're not really thinking about that distinction. So they'll say that things are mental items and just assume that they're conscious when clearly, right? I think you're right, Neville. Clearly, sensations are a theoretical construct. Intuitions, it's not so clear. Some people argue that sensations, I mean, without the Kantian baggage, some people argue that sensations are, that we don't normally experience sensations directly. We normally experience them indirectly, but that we can experience them directly. You poke yourself in the eye, right? Then you can have a color sensation and it's not attached to an object. So there is debate even about the low level. But I'd say, yeah, the low level, I would assume in the normal course of events, sensations are not available to conscious experience. Intuitions, probably you're right, they're not. That's probably the general drift of Kant's thought, is that conceptual structuring is a condition of possibility of experience. Gets a little bit more complicated with the aesthetics, but setting with the philosophy of art, not this particular passage. But I think that's probably reasonable, so that intuitions are themselves also arguably theoretical constructs. But it's just in terms of vocabulary, it's not hard to get clear about this, even though Kant doesn't help, right? Sensations feed into some machinery, and that machinery is space and time, and out of that you get intuitions, and that's why I think a decent way of thinking about intuitions is spatiotemporal particulars, and then those get fed into this further set of machinery, which involves conceptual structuring, and only then do you get experience.
Just as a quick clarifying question, I'm not sure if this will be helpful for anyone else, but maybe for me, because I'm getting a little confused. The is sensation something that comes after like the sense data itself? So I'm using terms that Kant would never use to try to, make sense of this in my head. But like we have whatever is being received that produces, say, sensation in the eyeball, or however we would like to think of that, but is distinctly not intuition, hasn't gone through that spatiotemporal process of contextualizing it into sensory intuition. Is sensation, can we say, well, maybe a better question is, it might as well be the same thing as like the sense data itself, or is the sensation and whatever is being sensed meaningfully distinct?
Yeah, I don't like the term sense data. I think that's confusing, because the original sense data theorists thought that sense data were available to introspection, right? They're the objects of our perceptual knowledge. The sense data theorists, those are the first, right, like explicit indirect realists. What is it that we see? We see sense data. But I know what you mean, and it's only when I actually looked that up and started reading some of those guys that I realized that. So I think your intuition, is right. It's the most minimal. Sensation is the most minimal registration of any kind of perception, the starting point of any kind of perceptual experience. Yeah, and Chase says data equals given, which is true, but that term is itself ambiguous, right? Because in the tradition, it's been interpreted as given to consciousness. And Kant is precisely at that turning point, right, where that Nevid is correctly emphasizing, where it's the data of experience are not necessarily themselves capable of being experienced. Maybe in principle they're inaccessible to consciousness. So, but it's still given, right? It's just you have it's the same kind of argument. It's just not one that goes from introspection. In order to have experience, we need this kind of structure set up. And it needs something that's going in, that's given to it. But now it's given to that structure rather than given to consciousness. So the metaphor still works, but it needs to be attended to more carefully.
The way you're all talking makes it seem that sensibility and sensation are both somehow connected to concepts or conceptualization in a way that intuition is not.
So sensibility is just the faculty where intuitions are constructed.
And so sensibility is then tied up with space and time then, I guess, because if sensibility is the faculty that through which intuitions come, and if that's done by space and time, then since the faculty or the capability of sensibility would be the way time and space structure those intuitions. Is that correct?
Yeah. Although I'm just reading the text now, and it's interesting. He doesn't say anything about that.
He does use the word sensibility, but he
yeah. He doesn't say space and time. I mean, we know right. I don't want to give the plot away. We know what he's going to say,
right.
But it is interesting that he's adopting for Kantians, it's probably interesting. He's adopting a certain level of circumspection about how that's going to turn out. And so sensibility is officially, it's just about receptivity. It's just about openness to the world.
So, talking about space and time at this point is like giving away the
right.
That's read the last page.
Exactly. Yeah.
At the risk of taking us down to a tangent, I mean, if this takes too long, I don't really want to, but one thing I am often confused by is this notion of this, I'm not even sure how to pronounce it, but the schemata or the schemata.
Yeah. Oh, that's, who knows what that's.
And well, I mean, what I read somewhere is that it is that which mediates between concepts of the understanding and experience. So it's the whatever that sort of, makes that mediation between those. And then space and time are the schemata for sensory intuitions. Is that not correct? Because I thought I saw somewhere it said space and time are that mediating whatever.
Lord.
Well, if that's
you're really getting into
going to take us too far afield, we can ignore that for now.
Yeah, no, that's broadly right. The schematism is what's supposed to mediate between concepts and intuitions for Kant, and I think the argument goes that the concepts of the understanding, like cause, are not in principle constrained only to apply to appearances. So one can understand what it is to talk of a cause in relation to things as they are in themselves, independently of our experience of them. But that we only, when we're using the category of causation in relation to ordinary experience, then that very abstract level, that logical level, where he talks about causes as being essentially conditional statements, right? If one thing, then another thing, at this very, very abstract level. In order for that to make sense, it has to be schematized, which means spatiotemporalized. So it's not that space and time are the forms of sensibility, those structures that give rise to intuitions, but then they have this second role to play because our conceptual, or at least some of our conceptual knowledge, has to be applied to experience. And we know that we can only have experiences through the medium of space and time. And so this logical notion of conditionality has to be spatiotemporalized, and when you spatiotemporalize it, lo and behold, what you get is the concept of necessary connection. So that is relevant because your other reading was the second analogy, right? But the schematism, everyone scratches their heads over what the schematism is about.
That's right. That's notoriously murky swamp in Kant scholarship.
Yeah, just don't talk about the deduction. Even murkier. And luckily Schopenhauer doesn't care about this stuff. He has a relatively unsophisticated, I think it would be fair, relatively unsophisticated. It's not like stupid or anything, but he does not want to get into those details.
Well, I have another question. Maybe I don't know if we're going through this too carefully, but on that first page, 172, the last full paragraph where he brings up the word appearance. So the effect of an object on the capacity for representation, insofar as we are affected by it, is sensation. That intuition, which is related to the object through sensation, is called empirical. The undetermined object of empirical intuition is called appearance. It's that last sentence that I'm having trouble with. The undetermined object of empirical intuition is called appearance. So I, in general, have confused by the term appearance, and then what does he mean by this undetermined object? I mean, he's not referring to the thing in itself, is he? Or is no? I didn't think so.
I think he just means. I'm looking at this and going, "What's he talking about?" I think he probably just means conceptually undetermined.
I see.
Like it's not.
So
it's something, but we can't say it's a tree because that's a conceptual determination.
Okay, so it's the appearance is the thing that's been processed by space and time, but not been processed by the categories, more or less. Okay.
It's a particular. I think that's right.
A particular. Okay. An uncategorized particular. So also not processed by other conceptualization, like is this a tree or a dog or a cat?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. But I mean, obviously, those are empirical concepts.
Right.
Things like cause fit into a different class because they're not empirical concepts, but they're definitely all concepts.
Yeah. I was reading some stuff earlier trying to figure out how empirical concepts come to be for Kant. I thought it was through like normal empiricist abstraction, but then the stuff I was saying said, no, it's not that. So anyway, I understand, I realize that those things like the concept of dog, the concept of cat, of tree, and all that are empirically determined, but how they are, I don't really understand. But that's not something he deals with in this section anyway. I'm ready to go on to the next page unless somebody else has some questions or comments. And if anybody has any better way to go about doing this, I'm open. I just, since we talked again last time at a very general level, I thought it might be helpful to clear up some of this vocabulary and so on. How about the distinction between form and matter? So he says at the bottom of 172, I call that in the appearance which corresponds to sensation, it's matter, but that which follows the manifold of appearance to be ordered in certain relations, I call the form of appearance. Since that within which the sensations can alone be ordered and placed in a certain form cannot itself in turn be sensation, the matter of all appearance is only given to us a posteriori, but its form must all lie ready for it in the mind a priori, and therefore can be considered separately from all sensation. So how are we doing on the distinction between his distinction between form and matter here?
I had it explained to me, and look, I think I've demonstrated so far I'm garbage about talking about these concepts, but I've had it explained to me that like the distinction between form and matter is pretty much that matter is what we know and form is how we know it. And this is probably like baby's first understanding of these ideas. But like matter is the specific content of our knowledge provided by basically everything we were talking about before. And form is the way that I keep wanting to go back to this term sense data, but it's not obviously not good here. But it's the way that whatever concept I'm trying to get at with that word is organized in the mind. Yeah, but I mean, like, I don't even know if that's necessarily correct in saying intuitions. Like, even if I was to say specifically like sensory intuitions, I feel like I don't know if that's really getting at what, I mean, maybe it is. Maybe that is what form is trying to get at. But
when he uses the word order, that seems to be important. to how he was understood.
We're having your sound is very low and muffled, by the way.
Sorry, I was saying that in that sentence, can you hear me better?
Yes.
That it was, that the term order seemed to me very important in his statement about what is the form of appearance.
Yeah, I think that's right. Order is very important. I think this form matter, it's also quite difficult to understand what he's talking about, but I think it's, you're worried about whether to pick like sensation or intuition or what should I pick? And I think the answer is all of them, that there's a series of I'm going to go back to this simplistic Horkheimer view, right? There's a series of production processes, and in each of them, right, whatever it is you're sticking into the machine is the matter, and whatever it is that's doing the processing, the machine itself, that's the form. And they're like a proper factory. One machine is I'm sounding like Deleuze now. One machine is connected to another machine, is connected to another machine, is connected to another machine. So they're in an order. So, you know, yeah, there you go.
Yeah,
It's you get
Chase made us go through that book.
I'm so sorry. You know, you got matter, sensation, and I've trained myself, Christian, to say sensation instead of sense data. You can do it. It's easy. Just takes a minute or two. You've got matter going in, and then you've got this spatiotemporal machine, and that creates intuitions, and then intuitions go into the big conceptual machine, and the press comes down, and that's, you know, cause and a whole bunch of other a priori structures, and then what the output of that is experience. So you've got the form matter distinction going on at least twice in the whole story. Yeah, right.
So if I understand you correctly, and I'm sorry if anybody let me know if these little questions are wasting people's time, but it almost sounds like the way that you said that let me just ask a clarifying question then. Is it the case that matter precedes sensation necessarily? Like matter is what sensation is sensationing?
Okay, so he's not talking about physical matter.
Right.
He's talking about the matter of perception. So okay. It's the first, it's the lowest level is not, because matter itself is something that we can only talk about once we've constituted experience, right? It's something, right, we have experience of. And we're talking about how experience is constructed. So it's the most immediate registration of the real on our minds is sensation. So it's a form matter distinction, a bit like, it's more like the form versus the matter of a book.
Yeah, so I mean, kind of going off what Joey had said, and again, maybe this is too simplistic, but I thought just in really general terms, you know, there's when I have an experience in the world, there is an aspect that is given. In other words, that just shows up. Where the hell from? I don't know, but it just shows up. And then there is, like you say, this machinery that then processes that stuff. So and the machinery, at least at this stage, like you said, this is giving away the punchline, but is going to be space.
It's not like Breaking Bad. It's okay.
And eventually the categories, right? So you've got space and time, the categories like sitting there waiting to do something. In a sense, they're a priori. You know, one way I describe it to undergraduates, it's like you've got this stuff sitting there waiting to process information. But if you don't have any information coming in, there's nothing to process. And so there's no experience. But then when this data comes in, you know, whatever it is, these intuitions show up, that machinery, as you put it, just kind of springs into action and structures all this stuff and makes it experienceable. Is that roughly correct?
Yeah, I think that's right. You know, and you know, you used you deployed an information processing metaphor, which I think is also perfectly appropriate, right? Data is right. That's the first registration of the real, in an information processing system. But what's an information processing system? Well, that data on its own is nothing. It's not anything, right? It has to be processed in order to amount to anything kind of useful, but pragmatically speaking, that process, I think, that's a decent way of thinking about Kant. I give my students, my undergraduates, I give them some rather outdated cognitive science, and say, you know, in the 1780s, this was some radical stuff. But in the 21st century, everyone knows that, you know, whatever is registered on your sensory surface, that's not experience. That's what your freaking brain is for, is to get from, you know, retinal image or something to actual experience. Kant was just, you know, kind of ahead of the game. He worked out that we needed to have a science to study that stuff before there was such a science. So in many ways, it's really today radically uncontroversial, some of this. But then he messes it up and it gets very controversial.
Oh, yes. Oh, go ahead.
So real quickly, when you were saying earlier about, you know, you sometimes say to your undergraduates that some of these like faculties lie in wait for data to be given for them to work upon. One of the points he makes, one of the major points he's trying to make in the critique, is that some of our errors in philosophy have come about by trying to operate this machinery without given intuitions, right? When we try to operate these concepts without matter given to us dynamically through sensibility, we end up speculating about the existence or non-existence of free will, God, the immortal soul, and we have no intuitions to correspond. So it's a machinery operating without, you know, the input that it should be operating on.
Yeah, it's wheeling free. That's a metaphor that Wittgenstein uses to describe that situation. I'm sure he didn't get it either from Kant or from Horkheimer, but it fits. It really fits.
Deriving conclusions from insufficient data.
What's that?
Deriving conclusions from insufficient data.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. I mean, Eric, you're right to, and Nevitt too, to recall us back to the, I mean, we're right in the details here, but the overall structure is, yeah, you don't have any intuitions. You're not thinking about anything. It's a whole thing is a huge, you know, critique of rationalism.
Joey asked the question about the manifold. Another thing that confuses me, and maybe this is, as you've been emphasizing, that Kant is not always really precise. In that paragraph that splits from 172 to 173, he says, I call that an appearance which corresponds to sensation, its matter, but that which allows the manifold of appearance to be ordered, I call form. And so he says the manifold of appearance. I think of the word manifold when he uses the word manifold of sensation, which, you know, as I was saying earlier, I thought of the manifold of sensation as the unprocessed sensory data that hasn't been, you know, processed by time and space. But when he says manifold of appearance, he just previously defined appearance, you know, like you were saying, as basically particulars. And so now I'm confused. The manifold of appearance, is that just all the collection of particulars?
I think he's not being precise. Okay. But also I think the same thing applies to manifold is another word for matter. So manifold is just something that's not one, it's diverse. So it can be applied, you know, you've got a diversity of sensations that are ordered in a certain way. But then you could also have a diversity of particulars that are ordered conceptually in a certain way. And so it's a forgivable error. Yeah, not in the aesthetic, Chase. He doesn't talk about synthesis in the Transcendental Aesthetic. It's conceptual unification of the manifold he describes as requiring synthesis.
So see, moving on. So he says, I call all representations pure in the transcendental sense, which nothing is to be encountered that belongs to sensation. Accordingly, the pure form of sensible intuitions is to be encountered in the mind a priori, where all of the manifold of appearance is into it in certain relations. And this pure form I call pure intuition. One thing that confuses me about the word intuition is like we talked about these intuitions earlier, which are either are or very close to sensory particulars, but then he talks about space and time as being intuitions. I mean, here he's, some places he calls space and time the forms of intuition, which that makes sense to me. Is he just being imprecise when he calls space and time intuitions? Because I mean, intuitions earlier, it's intuitions is something that you encounter in experience, right? But you don't encounter space and time. Things are because he goes at a great, in a great effort to show I never have a direct experience of space or time. So I'm a little confused as to why he calls those intuitions.
Yeah, he's an annoying person, isn't he? He changes his mind, or there is a huge debate in the secondary literature about this particular issue, about particularly the representation of time. But if we're just doing the aesthetic, he does in fact just think that we do have an experience of space and time. And what kind of experience is it? Well, they're intuitions. And so half the arguments in the aesthetic, half the arguments are designed to show the strong and interesting claim that we have a priori cognition, that objects are in space and time. That, in other words, that it's an argument against Hume, that we can't get our concepts of space or our representations of space and time, we can't get them from experience. Super interesting, I think, actually pretty successful arguments against Hume. And then half of the arguments are really technically Kantian type arguments where he's saying, well, and what kind of representation is it that we have of space? It's intuitive. It's not conceptual in the first instance. So space, and it's a weird claim. I mean, it's not completely indefensible. It's a weird claim. He thinks we have an intuition of space as one thing. It's one particular. The whole of space is given to us, he says, as a single particular. And it's sort of interesting, but also a bit tangential.
I thought his argument about if you think space is built up from smaller spaces, you kind of imagine assembling these smaller spaces.
Exactly.
You've already presupposed a larger, the space as such in which you can assemble these little chunks.
Yeah, that's an accessible argument. Pretty good. Yeah, although that's just an argument that there's only one space, right? That there can't be two spaces. But he's parlaying it into something stronger, which is that the type of cognition that we have of space is this intuitive cognition, so that space is itself a single particular. But I really think those are secondary. I have this, when I teach this to my undergraduates, and if I don't guide them really carefully through the text, they'll spend a lot of time talking about those arguments, which, we barely know what the intuition versus concept distinction is. So it's difficult to get too excited. Yeah, so I see in the comments, yeah, I mean, it's in general, it's definitely something's gone wrong if your cognition has no content. But it's really, but he doesn't seem to mind for space and time. Because there's no danger of kind of overstepping the bounds of experience with unwarranted speculation. if you have experiences of space and time, right? Whereas if you're using reason, like the rationalists do, to try and do things like prove the existence of God or the freedom of the will or whatever, then you're passing beyond the possibility of experience. So it's not, in a way, it's not empty cognition as such that's the problem. It's treating empty cognition as if it were full. It's running on empty, but thinking that the tank is full and it's all making perfect sense. Not a great metaphor.
Could have sworn in here, is there somewhere that we have no direct intuition of space, but maybe.
Yeah, no, he I'm not sure if he says it for space, Nevitt, but he does say it for time. And it plays a crucial role in the first analogy, where he tries to prove the existence of a single substance. And that a crucial premise of that is that we have no direct experience of time. And that's the place where people are like, what is that? That's not consistent with that aesthetic. I think you're right. On the face of it, it's not.
No, are you talking about the time? Where is it on page 174 that you're talking about the time thing, or is it later on in the?
Time shows up later. Well, I guess he does. He initially starts talking about it on 174,
Right.
but that's still primarily about space, and then he talks about time.
178, right?
Yeah, but I see what you're looking at though. He says, so everything belongs to this is on 174. Time can no more be intuited externally than space can be. Oh no, see, I think there all he's saying, time can no more be intuited externally than space can be intuited as something in us. There he's just saying that time is only something you can experience internally, within your mental world, whereas in space you can only experience externally. One thing I try to give this a little bit of credence is I tell students, imagine you're in a sensory deprivation tank, and I don't know, I've been in a float tank because Joey and Chase made me do that, but I've never been in a real sensory deprivation tank where you're floating there and and all that. But I tell, imagine that you were in a state where you really had zero, if it's possible, zero sensory input. You're still going to experience time, right? I mean, there's still, you can count, for example, 1, 2, 3, even if you have no sensory data. So, that's just a bit of evidence to support the idea that time is something that happens, is an internal mental experience.
But Joey pointed this out in the chat right above the first full paragraph on page 174 at the top. He says that there are two pure forms of sensible intuition as principles of an a priori cognition, namely space and time. So there he's saying that there's a similarity, right?
Well, they're similar in the sense that they're both a priori. In other words, they both have to, his claim is that space and time, I guess I'm sure this is imprecise. Space and time are kind of sitting there waiting to process information. So they're a priori in the sense that space and time are, I don't know what you can say, because they're not, when you can't say they're, like they're somewhere, but space and time are, ready to go. They're a priori. They're just kind of sitting there, both of them. So they're both a priori structuring features of experience. But then you get this data that pops in, the given, this sensory intuitions, and then space and time, which are already set. So the sensory data is not a priori. It's not already sitting there waiting. It has to come to you. It's a posteriori. It appears. But when it comes to you, when it appears, then space and time, which are already there, and it's wherever there is, kind of grab that data and organize it in terms of space and time.
Also, though, think of the to me interesting phrase, sensible intuition. He's saying that there are two forms of sensible intuition. I don't understand the meaning of principles that seem to tie together sensible intuition and a priori cognition. I mean, is he saying that those phrases are equivalences?
So I think he would say that in order for me to experience this object, there is no, this is kind of like we're talking about a little before. In order for me to have an experience of something, there has to be sensible intuitions. In other words, there has to be sensory, I don't want to use the word data, but sensory stuff there. But then I can't experience this as an object that I can make sense of unless it really is spatially and temporally structured. And so experience requires both of those. It requires these a priori time and space structures, and it requires that there be sensory intuitions both. Is that?
Yeah, no, that's helpful, but it's also, I mean, this sentence is very strange to me because he also uses the phrase pure forms. Right, and it seems to me if Kant is using the word pure, that's important. That has a meaning. That adjective. Well, I know it's translated in English, but you know what I mean. That
Pure.
He doesn't use the term pure light.
Not derived from experience.
Like it wouldn't like to think
Not
of like
empirical.
I think like forms like when we like look at like the space part, like wouldn't it be like the pure form of space? It would be essentially that infinite given magnitude, that like space as a pure form is like big space, I guess, big P space, small p space or small s space is like a particulate determined spaces that we could think of. So it wouldn't count as that. You pointing at that and saying space as big S space would be non-pure, right? Or am I?
I thought what he was saying is that space and time are understandable by the human intellect.
You say that again?
Sorry, my computer is having a fit. What I'm saying is that in this sentence, it seems like what he's saying is space and time can be understood, known by human beings. That they're not just abstract concepts that we use. That's why he invokes a priori cognition and intuition.
I don't know. I mean, it's a good question because if space and time are these a priori forms that are what gives temporal and spatial structure to my experience, to what degree can I know those forms? I don't know the answer to that question, actually.
I think Kant would point out geometry is the science of space. That is how we come to know space cognitively, by doing geometry. But before we ever have any objects of experience, we must already have the capacity to represent them either spatially or temporally.
Yeah, I think that's right. He makes that. That's one of the arguments in the metaphysical exposition. And I mean, Ed, one of the reasons why it's confusing is he hasn't made any arguments yet. Right? We're reading through the text, and he's just like, well, here is I'm going to define a whole shed load of terms, and then I'm going to tell you, what my conclusion is. And it's a weird conclusion, and the terms are all unfamiliar, but he hasn't established that yet. The definitions, sure, you can give him those, but he just hasn't established any of that. So he's putting the cart before the horse, in terms of the narrative structure. But one of the arguments in the metaphysical exposition is, he says, look, you can imagine space without objects, but you can't imagine objects without space. And if you accept that claim, most people do, although I have had students contest it, but most people accept that claim. And if you do, it's an argument in favor of the a prioricity of space, or of our representation of space. And so he is clearly thinking something, when he's talking about the pure form of space, I think he's thinking something like that, right? About space without objects. It's just space. I'm a little bit, so I think pure does generally align with a priori and non-empirical, but I do think they're different. They're intentionally different concepts. I think pure means doesn't have any matter in it. It's a formal structure which doesn't have any input for one reason or another. And we can, I'm trying to make this consistent with Eric's emphasis on the critique, but I think you can. Kant thinks you can think about things in themselves, right? Independently of experience. You just can't know anything about them, but you can think them. There's no contradiction. You can think stuff about them. So there's some level of accessibility, just not, what you can't do is have knowledge. You can't make propositional claims about them that can be defended. It's pretty familiar because it's more or less the origin of logical positivism. But I think, so pure, it's going to turn out that these pure intuitions of space and time, they're going to turn out to be the same thing as the cognitive structures, and it's going to turn out that we know the cognitive structures a priori, but I don't think they mean the same thing exactly. And it's maybe important because if you say that pure forms are non-empirical, then that denies that we can have experience of them. But he's affirming that we can have an experience of space and time. So they are objects of experience. It's just they're weird objects of experience and what's weird about them. So here's a case where a transcendental form is accessible to consciousness, like unproblematically accessible to consciousness. Experience space. We have a representation of space.
I did not realize that.
And this may be true for the categories. I don't know. Is it? Can we have an experience of a cause? It's not so clear with the categories, but it's definitely. I think you can't make sense of the argument, right? If you think about him as somehow thinking that space and time are in our representations of space and time are inaccessible. They're clearly not inaccessible. We have them, and one of the arguments is we can at least conceive of having an experience of space without objects. The other way around, we can't conceive of it. So it's at least a possible experience. So space and time are pure forms. We know them a priori, but they're also objects of experience.
Okay, so that's another way when my understanding was incorrect, because I thought that, I thought you couldn't experience space, you could only experience things in space. So apparently that's incorrect. But I also thought that that if I think I know what space is, whatever it is I think I know is not actually space. That I thought that I can abstract from my experience and I can generate a concept of empty space. But that concept that I have of empty space is not a an accurate representation of space. But he says I can have an accurate concept of space. Is that correct?
Well, so that's no, I didn't say that.
Oh, okay.
I tried to correct myself every time I said space to representation of space, because
Okay.
at the beginning he's only talking about our representation of, well, in this immediate the couple of paragraphs before he really gets into it, he hasn't made any distinctions yet, so he talks promiscuously. But when he gets into it, he's quite clear that the target of his investigation is our representation of space. How do we get that?
So my representation of space is not the a priori form of space. They're not identical.
No, I think they are. Uh-oh.
Okay, I'm confusing. Because I thought
it's all clear in my head. Damn.
So would the a priori form of space, would that be something like the way that we imagine these so he talks about the argument from geometry, how these Euclidean ideas kind of, we have these innate kind of ways of knowing that they're true that are not analytic. So the way that we have a representation of those, would that then be considered a representation of the pure form of space?
Maybe we just I don't know if this is getting, I don't know why this has gotten so complicated. I mean, we got to start with our representations, right? Where else are you going to start? Yeah, back to the text, exactly. Back to the things themselves. We've got to start with our representations. And so that's what he does. He starts with we have a uncontroversial premise. We have some representation of space. Difficult to see how you're going to, I have never had even the most hussy student deny that. We have a representation of space. The start of the argument is just, well, where do we get it from? And there are two options, right? Or so where do we get it from is a little, how Kant talks a little bit later, but we can talk absolutely in the tradition of the early modern philosophers and say, all of our representations, we can know them either a posteriori or a priori. How do we know this one? And then he has some arguments, which are quite good, to suggest that our representation of space must be a priori. Then once he's established that, then he starts to move on. So because we read this beginning bit where he's pushing he's making a lot of undefended claims. It seems like there's a lot of stuff going on, but the way the argument proceeds is a little bit more clear, right? First question is just, is Hume right at the beginning of the treatise? Do we acquire our representation of space from experience? And Kant's like, no, that's not possible. It's a great argument against Hume. Can't do that. But if it's not a posteriori, it must be a priori. Right? So that establishes that we have a representation of space, which we assumed, and it's a priori. I'm just going to tell you as how I presented in my class, which is not super accurate, but it's good enough, I think, is, well, what's the best explanation for that? That's weird. How did we get this a priori knowledge? Best explanation is that it is a cognitive structure. Right? Why else? I mean, God could have put it there. Why is it a priori? There's a limited number of possible reasons. And Kant's like, here's one that's better than just God put it there, or, Leibnizian pre-established harmony or whatever. Here's a better one. It's the beginning of his transcendental argument, right? It's a condition of possibility of experience. We can't have experience without it. And that means it is, like Nevitt's been emphasizing, right? It's lying there like some feline predator in wait for its data. Right? It's it's a part of our innate cognitive endowment, to put it in slightly more contemporary terminology. Good one. Thank you, Chase. That's great. You go with that one. Just shut the book now. And that's sort of plausible. And then you've got those three things, right? That we have a representation of space that's not really controversial. What's our cognitive relationship to it? Well, it's a priori. He's got a little bit of an argument for that. That's a pretty good. It's at least certainly it's comprehensible. I actually think it's pretty convincing. What's the best? But great. That's just some weird like philosophy status thing, right? Oh, the status of this proposition is a priori. Great. Why is it a priori? Well, my explanation is it has to do with the structure of the mind, right? Here's some stuff we can know about the structure of the mind. And then you've got, right, it's a form. It's a pure form because we can have the representation. We can have access to the representation without there being any. We can have access to a representation in space without there being objects in it. At least we think that's possible. So we've got it's a cognitive form. It's a pure form. It doesn't necessarily matter needs it to be experienced, but it doesn't need matter to be experienced. There's that asymmetry, and it's a priori. So it's a pure a priori form. But it doesn't all come at once. There's a bit of a step-by-step process to the argument.
I feel like I shouldn't belabor this more, but this is on middle of page 177 on conclusion B. In the middle of that, he says, the constant form of this receptivity, which we call sensibility, is a necessary condition of all the relations within which objects can be intuited as outside us. And if one abstracts from these objects, it is a pure intuition which bears the name of space. And so, I guess what I was saying is I don't doubt, I don't deny that I experience space in the sense that I experience things in space, but it doesn't seem to me that I have a representation of the pure form of space. And it seems like this sentence supports that. If one abstracts from these objects, it is a pure intuition which bears the name of space, as is the pure intuition is not, I thought, is not something, I don't have a pure intuition of space. I have sensory intuitions of things that take up space. And if I abstract from all of that, then I can come up with this concept of pure space. But that I thought he was saying, I don't have, but I don't have a direct experience of pure space.
Right.
Although he calls it an intuition, which is confusing.
I've got a doomsday machine for you, Nevitt. Just use that. It destroys every object in the universe except you. As a matter of fact, right now, I don't have an experience of what's going on, a direct experience of what's going on, but I do actually, because I'm looking at my image. I don't have a direct experience of what's happening in the next room, right? But it's an object of possible experience. I just have to walk in there. But at my daughter's room, I would have to knock, and we'd have to go through this whole elaborate, 20-minute ritual. But it's definitely the object of a possible experience. And I take it that. I see where you're going, Nevitt. We're in the weeds now. I think we've gone beyond the amount of Kant that you need for understanding Schopenhauer. If we're having this debate, we're already definitely doing specific things. But metaphysical exposition too, right? I think that's what he's getting at there. Space is a necessary representation a priori. Blah blah. One can never represent that there is no space, although one can very well think that there are no objects to be encountered in it. I think he's saying, as a matter of fact, no one has that experience because because the universe has objects in it. But we can think it's a possible experience. But the crucial thing is we can't think the possibility of objects without space, right? And it's that generates that metaphysical exposition too. That's the first, even though he doesn't call it He says it's metaphysical, whatever that means. But that's really the first instance of a transcendental argument there, right? It's because space is a necessary condition of our representation of objects, that it has to precede them, and we have to have a representation of space that precedes objects. And this is one of the arguments he's using to establish that conclusion. So I think, yeah, you're right. As a matter of fact, we don't have right now an intuition of space without objects. You could get it. You just need the right doomsday machine.
Or you need to go back into the sensory deprivation tank that I forced you to go into.
But in that, you don't have an intuition of space in that case, because, if it really was purely sensory deprived, you would just have the internal representations, and when you say, if, destroy everything but my body, well, there my body is taking up space.
Oh, no, it's a really big doomsday machine. It destroys everything except your mind.
Okay. Well, then I don't have any sensory apparatus in which to get sensations. So anyway, maybe we should get out of these weeds. If anybody wants to keep going on this space stuff, I'm fine, but we're running out, we're getting low on time. I'm wondering if we should talk about the second analogy.
Yeah, that's one thing I'd just like really briefly to share about the aesthetic.
Okay.
So I think those metaphysical exposition arguments 1 and 2 are pretty convincing. Like, Kant gets a bad rap, and it's difficult, and he's wrong and stupid, and so on. And so I pedagogically, I place a lot of emphasis on, like, no, look, this really works. It's actually not that bad of an argument. It's a good argument. So I think that first argument, those first pair of arguments in the metaphysical position, I think they're good, right? I think cognitive science, it's accepted doctrine that we have an a priori. No, they wouldn't put it like that, right? But if you translate cognitive science into philosophy, we have an a priori representation of space. The second argument, so this is the one in the section where he talks about geometry, right? Now that argument is widely discredited, the argument from geometry, right? Because it's a famous and actually kind of interesting debate, because Einstein actually specifically name checks Kant in an article published at about the time of special relativity, because he says, you know what, space is, insert physics talk here, a Riemann manifold or whatever, and it's not Euclidean. So Kant's wrong. And it's super interesting that Einstein would take the trouble to I feel, to be refuted by Einstein, I'm like, success. But so no one takes that argument seriously anymore, right? That we have, or I don't want to, maybe you do, but most people don't take that argument seriously, that we have a priori cognition of space through the discipline of Euclidean geometry. Turns out that's not right. Is there any sense you can make of that view? Maybe there's a much more limited version of it, which is that's the IBE argument I was giving you. The best explanation we have for the a prioricity of our representation of space is that it's a cognitive structure, right? But then actually the bit you were just quoting from, Nevitt, in section 6, the conclusion from these concepts, he goes on to say, so I noticed, Nevitt, that you've been playing with this, right? Is my representation of space accurate? Right, okay, I can talk about my representation of space, but what about space itself? And everything that he said up to this point has suggested a view that's very similar to the cognitive science view, which is that we have an a priori representation of space, but broadly speaking, it's got to correspond to real space. Broadly speaking, right? If we're recovering, we've got this two-dimensional data on the surface of our retina, and we need an algorithm that the brain implements to recover three-dimensional positionality, blah, blah, blah. Of course, the word recover there suggests that, yeah, the algorithm is a priori, it's built in, it's innate, it's part of cognitive structure. But what it does is produce some kind of a more or less accurate representation of the way things actually are. And that works both for the a priori representation argument and for the IBE, that the best explanation for that is that space and time are cognitive structures. But in that section 6, he goes right away and says, I'm not going to be able to find the quote now. And says space is, yes, so 176, conclusion from the above concepts, bit A, space represents no property at all of things in themselves. And that's where things get spooky and weird, right? Because that's a famously invalid argument, right? Our representation of space could be a priori, and it could also be, the best explanation for it might be that it's a cognitive structure, and it could still correspond, broadly speaking, with a property of things as they are in themselves. But Kant takes it that the fact that space is a cognitive structure, the fact that our representation of space is a cognitive structure, shows that it doesn't apply to things in themselves. And that's where a lot of people get off the boat.
With regard to the relative or the non-Euclidean space, why couldn't you say that he's accurate or he's correct in that our intuition, I mean, my intuitions are not non-Euclidean. My intuitions are, in fact, quite Euclidean. I don't experience non-Euclidean space. You can say if, over vast distances with great masses and all that, the space-time bends and you get these non-Euclidean structures. But as far as my intuitions go, they're very Euclidean. My experience of the world is absolutely Euclidean. So I don't know. I mean, that doesn't solve that problem, because then you have a problem with, but then what? There's this disjunction between my experience of the world and what physicists tell me space actually does. But it does seem that my intuitions are not non-Euclidean.
Right, but then you're just explicitly only talking about your experience, and you're not talking about how things actually are, right?
Right, and that follows an interpretation of Kant, does it not? That he's primarily talking about epistemology. He's primarily talking about the way we experience the world, not and explicitly trying to say, I'm not telling you what the world is like in itself. I'm telling you what your experience is
right.
like.
Yeah, except that in the aesthetic, he is trying to tell you what the world is like in itself. He's telling you it's not spatiotemporal.
Yeah, well,
right. It's right there in that passage.
Whenever you said people get off the boat there, is that to say that like he doesn't have a good argument for it, or people are just like can't go that far? Like, does he have an argument?
A bit of both. I don't think he has great. He does. I don't think he has a great argument. He doesn't address it explicitly. It's something that people noticed only somewhat later, after he was dead. And he doesn't have a great argument for it. I don't think. Certainly nothing that is as clear as the arguments for the first two claims. But also, I think there is a sense in which, especially early analytic philosophers were just like, no, come on, this is bullshit. And they were, I think, unsympathetic. So no one wrote about Kant for years, because it was Kant, Hegel, Germans, it's all the same, unless it's Morris Schlick or something. It's all the same. It doesn't make any sense at all. It's ridiculous. And it wasn't until the 1950s, really, that analytic philosophers started to even begin to talk about Kant. And then they were Peter Strawson's book, The Bounds of Sense, 1959 or something, 1960, really unsympathetic about that. Yeah, he was just like, well, that Kant's wrong. about this really basic point. Really basic point, and I don't know if there's anything we can get from this. Maybe. But for Schopenhauer, Schopenhauer starts from crazy. He starts from that assumption. He's just like, it's a far from being like a fallacious argument. Like people point out that it mistakes disjunctions for being exclusive when they could be inclusive, right? It might be the fact that space, our representation of space, is a property of our minds, doesn't show that it's not also a property of things in themselves. Kant seems to treat it as if it is. Well, Schopenhauer just doubles down. He's like, yes, if I've shown that something is transcendental or a priori, or a condition of possibility of experience, I've shown that that things as they are in themselves do not have that property. He just starts there. And then he just refers you to Kant. Doesn't have any argument. He's like, do you want an argument? Go to Kant. Yeah, born on that empty boat. Right. Listen, y'all, I've got to go. Thank you for organizing this. And I know you organize these things like every 10 minutes, it seems like, according to Chase. So that's a real service. I really enjoyed this. I'm going to try and stick around when I can.
Well, we very, very much appreciate your joining us whenever you can. So yeah, please do whenever you're available.
This is the most difficult bit, though, the Kant. Schopenhauer. No one is going to make any money pointing out that Schopenhauer is inconsistent, right? We just start there and we see if there's anything else we can say. It'll be a lot easier, I think.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
See you all next week.
Okay.
Oh, that's great having Alistair be the explainer guy. Oh,
Well, is it your turn now? Because
no.
second section on time.
No. I think now it's Eric's turn actually.
Oh, okay, Eric.
I think he's the next in line of succession to be explainer guy.
Well, we don't need explanations now. We just point to Kant and we do what we want. We
just waffle.
So all my arguments will just be based off of appeal to the experience of the sensory deprivation tank.
Yeah, but that's still page 178, the first statement on time. Time is not an empirical concept.
Yeah, which you can understand if you go in the sensory deprivation tank long enough. Okay. I'm only joking.
I wanted to reinforce, I don't know, for some reason I've always kind of wondering like what the buy-in around that Kantian claim is, I guess, like amongst like modern day philosophers or philosophy after Kant around like, I mean, I just like the way that, we fleshed it out around like this idea that just because something is a cognitive structure, that it's not something part of reality. And I guess that's like that. I feel like that's always the intuition I've had when I've thought of Kant and wondered like, oh, well, he probably has a really good argument to beat me out. But I mean, like, I find what Alistair just said maybe validating that a lot of people have gotten off the boat at that point. And I guess I do wonder, like, is there still like an argument there? I don't know. But then it does really like, it kind of ruffles my feathers that like Schopenhauer just takes that and runs with it, which, again, I don't know, because I guess from what I've, I haven't even started the Schopenhauer book yet. But I am like excited to read it because of how just interestingly kind of in line it is with, these like intuitive conceptions and like Eastern thought and stuff. But just kind of hearing that he just jumps on that like absurd boat and runs with it is kind of just like, oh, what? But I wonder, like, you know, when we think about like Schopenhauer's influence on Nietzsche, and I'm recalling Nietzsche, I feel like these are like famous passages when he's talking about like that kind of like development of like, oh, this is not the real world. Oh, that's the real world. Oh, wait, the two worlds are not different. Like, this is, I don't know if that makes, everyone knows what I'm referring to. I feel like it's like a famous little, somebody could put it better if it's important, but I'm wondering, you know, Nietzsche is reacting maybe against this idea of like two separate worlds in Schopenhauer, and maybe Schopenhauer's like running with Kant. I don't know, maybe I'm just getting way ahead of us, but
What, you know, one thing that makes me at least sympathetic to that, you know, to what Kant and Schopenhauer say about that is Hume's argument. We have absolutely zero access to the unprocessed world, literally zero, and cannot possibly have any direct access to that world. And so it you know, it may be logically invalid to say the world as it is in itself does not operate according to space and time. Nevertheless, it seems to me it is legitimate to say there's no way we can know whether it does or not. And so to say, you know, to me, it does not seem absurd to say, if in fact space and time are a priori structures of cognition, then we have no warrant for saying that things in themselves are structured by space and time. That seems a legitimate inference to me.
That's what I'm reading from Kant as well. And I was going to point out too, in much of the subsequent interpretations and literature on Kant, there's a lot of disagreement about how to interpret and how to interpret thing in itself, how to interpret how Kant would describe the world outside of our experience of it, right? If we could even do such a thing, right? Kind of what Joey was kind of anticipating it. And there are many scholars, I want to say Strawson is one of the main ones, who interprets Kant as positing two worlds, right? The world of experience and the world outside of experience. And those are, you know, two worlds interpretations, but many others have taken it to be two aspects, right? Two ways of taking objects. Either objects considered with full knowledge of how we take it in, how it's mediated, or the object considered as it would be apart from our relationship to it. Not a different world as such, just different ways of knowing.
Yeah, my reading, which I've been hammering at Christian over the last week, but it's clearly just my reading, or at least one reading. You know, I'm guessing other people would agree, is I think of Kant as maintaining a fairly Humean skepticism about what things are, quote, outside experience. And so that, you know, the way I imagine Kant saying is, I can have experience of this world of sensory experience, and I can use transcendental deductions to push my knowledge a little bit further and say there must be these a priori structures that give rise to the structure of this experience, but I can't really go beyond that. And so, you know, the way I read Kant, and he does say things that seem to imply this, maybe he says things that imply the opposite as well. You know, as Alistair's pointed out, he's not consistent all the time, but that the way I read it is that if you know, like there's that famous passage, you can talk about the noumena in a negative sense, but you shouldn't talk about it in a positive sense. Because if you say something positive about the noumena, you're trying to extract knowledge about something about which you can have no knowledge. And so I see him as, because I think he says explicitly, I am trying to probe the limits of possible knowledge. And I'm telling you, the further, you know, Hume pushed him back a certain distance. I can push them a little farther than Hume by using these transcendental deductions. But beyond that, Hume's right. You don't have any experience of that. And if you start making truth claims about the noumena and things in themselves, you know, my way of reading it, those are terms that you use because we have to talk about it, and you can think about it, but what you're thinking about is not what it is. It's just cognitive placeholders for something you can't really talk and think about. That's my interpretation. But, you know, as Eric is pointing out, there are other interpretations, like the two aspect theory.
Oh, yeah. Oh, I mean, what you were describing, I want to say, is consistent either with two world or two aspects. But almost undeniable, like Kant took on such a large part of Hume at the same time reacting against Hume. And I agree with everything you just said. Like the major difference is he seems to take on a lot of Hume, but he wants, like I've said before, he wants to recover causation so that we can also have Newton, you know, because it's hard to reconcile Hume and Newton.
Yeah, and I think, you know, one way I read the transition from Hume to Kant is that Hume says, my experience is just a bundle of perceptions. And I hear Kant going, oh, come on. It's not just a bundle of perceptions. If it was just a bundle of perceptions, you would just experience shit moving and color shifting and changing. That's not what your experience like. Your experience is very well structured in terms of space and time and cause and effect. And so then Kant's, you know, Kant says, well, then the fact that I have this kind of structured experience means there must be something that gives rise to that structure. But Hume's correct in observing that whatever it is that structures this experience does not appear within experience itself. So there must be these transcendental structures that account for the structured nature of my experience, which Hume doesn't even bother to, or maybe doesn't notice. He assumes that the bundle of perceptions is structured, but I think Kant's saying, if it really was just a bundle of perceptions, it wouldn't be structured. So that's my general way. That's why I say, you know, he accepts this sort of Humean thing. All you have are your perceptions, but we can deduce these other structuring features of experience.
I would push that a little bit and say, I think Hume admits that we can structure our experience. However, his way of structuring our experience, instead of cause, we have the habit of,
Yeah.
Right. So there's a structure, but Kant's problem is that the way we structure our experience, according to Hume, is always entirely contingent, always entirely accidental. Newton's physics doesn't rely on contingent laws of nature.
I see.
It trades in necessity. And how can you account for necessity? That's Hume's big bugbear with causes, right? Cause is the necessity of A to B, you know, and you can't perceive the necessity. So if you can't perceive the necessity directly, it's probably a figment of your imagination you've imposed. And Kant says, no, it's not something you impose after the fact. It's something that already structures it before you experience it as such.
Yeah, and I you know, I wouldn't say that Hume would say it's you just made it up, but that, like you said, it's habit. We have this habitual tendency to do this, but even Hume calls it necessary connection. But he cannot explain. So I like the way you put it. He cannot explain the necessity. All he can say is we have this habit, but the habit could have developed otherwise. But like you said, then I hadn't thought of it that way. But then after Newton, it's like, no, it couldn't have developed otherwise. It had to be this way. Why is that?
And that, I mean,
The necessity of contingency.
So this discussion takes the second analogy as well. I don't know if you wanted to jump into that, but we've kind of primed it just in these last few lines here.
Tristan
wanted to talk about the geometry. I don't know if before we leave this.
I think I just wanted to know what you were getting at when, and I guess this is to go back to like the space and time aspect, but also whether or not the veracity, if Einstein's takedown of Kant here is really that has a lot of veracity to it or not, is kind of what I was trying to get at on the space part. but we can get to the time thing. And the only thing that I could think of is that as y'all are just talking, as far as like how space is concerned, I think Berkeley reminds me of a full peak acid trip where everything's just ideas, everything's just coming to. It's unorganized, you know what I mean? It's just all ideas, man. And then Hume is like the come down rationalization of those appearances, you know, like you're still tripping balls a little bit on the ideas, namely empiricism. And then Kant's, you know, your post trip recovery, where you're kind of like, no, the only reason why those things appeared to me as such is because of these necessary components of my brain. The things which ferment, you know, the things that are the same across the trips are necessarily part of my cognition, so on and so forth. You know, I'm still here in both those instances, therefore I endure, I'm necessary for these things. So that's what this conversation reminded me of. But I really kind of want to get to the time component as we're running out of time.
Yeah,
I'd say I really like that differentiation of peak acid trip to what is it, immediately post or coming down, and then the post trip reflection on it. Although I think I would say that the peak is probably like Leibniz. Where it's like infinite infinities within infinite infinities of infinite infinities,
You know,
whatever
yeah,
perspective
actually,
you
know
look
what,
at.
Chase, I'm going to agree with you because I did trip a little bit of acid when I was going through my Leibniz reading phase, and that was not necessarily a good combination. No recommend. No recommend.
I thought maybe it would make it more sense, make more sense. No,
Yeah, it ended eventually.
I can definitely
No,
hear some guy going, "Oh man, it's just like, you know, like it's like infinity after infinity, and you're just this little shiny ball that's reflecting all these others." Yeah, I can hear
yeah,
that guy.
so William James, he famously said that he could only understand Hegel when he did nitrous oxide. It was only under the influence of nitrous oxide that Hegel made just perfect sense. And then as soon as he came down, it was just like nothing. It's like, what the fuck's he talking about? I don't know. Maybe something, I don't know. Maybe Leibniz says something like that with LSD. I don't know. But I don't want to incriminate myself or anyone here. But so I guess I should probably just stop talking about it.
Yeah, we're recording this, so we can use it as evidence. We don't have a lot of time. Do we want to talk about the second analogy, or is that too heavy a lift?
I mean, just to kill two birds with one stone really quick. I think it's interesting how I feel like Kant's exploration of time isn't complete without the second analogy. Like the second analogy is what brings, I think, what we colloquially refer to like as an experience of time together, to where he ropes in this notion of causality with what could otherwise be extrapolated as like a moment to moment kind of flash. It's this causality that kind of webs it all together in a really interesting way. I mean, unless I'm misinterpreting Kant, it seems like without that causal component, time is a very, it's something that we can, again, conceptualize. We can conceptualize moments in time, but it's not necessarily what we experience when we're talking about time and again, this like colloquial sense. We talk about time as like a flow of things happening. That only happens when we bring causality, the second analogy, back into the equation, right?
Yeah, so I think that's a good place to start. So this gets into something we were talking about towards the beginning about the schematism. So that schematism, at least the way that I understand it, which is probably not that well, is that's when concepts, okay, basically for them to be legitimate for Kant, they have to be concepts that are applicable to this structuring of possible experience. If they're not, then they become, ideas of reason and all that. But so the schematism is part of how he argues that the concepts of the understanding do in fact relate to space and time in our experience. So that's also where he then shows that through I can't remember exactly what he calls all these, but you get the analogies. So the one we're actually covering is the analogies of experience. So that has to do with the categories of relation, where some of the other ones, he goes through and shows how all these categories that he has, that come from kind of like logical kind of maneuvers, sort of. But then he has to show how those, logical forms, actually structure experience. So then he has to, kind of reason then from experience. So that's what he's doing with the analogies of experience with these different categories of relation. So substance, cause, and then reciprocity or community. So the second analogy of experience, that's going to be cause. So therefore, that's going to give you a much fuller account of space and time, because that's how he's showing this is actually structuring our experience of space and time, or our experience really in general. So that makes sense that indeed it's much better than the really complex stuff we were talking about with, the pure forms of intuition and how you have a representation of that. I agree. I'm still, even after all that was said, I'm not sure I totally understand that or whatnot. But then once he's talking here about, on one level, it's very complex in terms of the architectonics of how it all kind of culminates in certain points for Kant. But then he is actually talking about our experience here with that second analogy, which I think definitely helps. So the basic way I understand this is he's kind of making this distinction between kind of subjective grasp of time sequences versus an objective one. So the subjective one is contingent in its order of succession. And that is where he talks about the house. So I can look around a house, but the order in which I look around the house is subjective. It's contingent. It doesn't matter if I looked at the roof first, or I started with, the ground, or this side or that side. That doesn't matter. That's not necessary. So what is necessary, though, the objective time sequences, that's where he uses the example from the boat. Yeah, the boat going down the stream. So I see that going down. It presents an order of succession, and that is not contingent. It's necessary and objective. And he's saying, okay, how does that happen? How can we make this distinction? We can only make this distinction because we apply the category of cause as this necessary connection to our experience, to give us experiences of objects working in, this structure of succession and whatnot. So that's my basic description of it. There's a lot in the actual text that I'll say that was really complicated and convoluted, at least it seemed like to me, that I didn't get, but at least I think I get the basics of it. I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's mostly accurate. But to be clear, we can conceive of our perception of a house and different parts of the house, successively in terms of a subjective ordering, but we don't have anything objective for the ordering. But we could also talk about our perceptions of a ship going upstream in terms of subjective ordering. But one of the things that Kant is trying to say is that we also understand this as a necessarily ordered objectively, because we have a notion of cause. we understand that, you know, that one and the same thing moved from this point in the river to this point in the river. Causation was involved. There's a level of objectivity and necessity precisely because we bring it under a rule, right? A rule of causation. Whereas our successive perceptions of the different part of the house, there's no objective rule to bring that under except spatially, right? We're not talking about cause as such.
So if that's the basic takeaway, I think I can live with that. So just to summarize, there are certain successions of what representations, is that I always worried about what word to use, but there's certain successions that necessarily follow a certain order, and there's nothing in the experience that shows me that they have to follow that order. So there must be something a priori that is imposing that order. Is that the basic idea?
Right. But to be a little bit careful about this too, and I mean, to be fair, I read this earlier today. It was Henry Allison discussing Schopenhauer's treatment of Kant and where he got it wrong, right? Schopenhauer thinks that he can object to Kant by saying, he takes Kant as saying the only way we can temporarily order any of our perceptions is through causation. And Henry Allison is pointing out that Kant's argument is not about all of our appearances as such, but causation is how we temporarily and objectively order the change in state from one state to another state regarding a substance. So not all of our appearances, because all of our appearances might be successive and there might be an ordering that's not causal, right? But in terms of changes and alteration in a substance, right? Specifically, we're looking at all the appearances, the different appearances that represent alterations in a substance.
That's helpful, because the first part of this, it seemed to me he was trying, I mean, it looked like a justification, not of cause and effect, but of the category of substance, you know, that all you experience are these, you know, what some people would then call what are secondary qualities, or, you know, the sub accidents. All you experience are these accidental properties. And it seemed like initially what he was trying to justify is that you must have a notion of substance, of an object that underlies these things in order to make sense of the idea that these really are the properties, changing properties of an underlying substance. But then the way you put it.
That's in the first analogy. He says that in the first analogy though.
Okay. And then, but he seems like in the second analogy, he kind of goes over through that again quickly, and then brings in the business about the house and all that. So that's really helpful. So he's talking about specifically the succession of properties in things that we experience as being objects, having like a unified substance of some kind.
Right.
Yeah, the second analogy is obviously building on the first. But that's seeing how that is, that definitely helps kind of give it more context, and rather just kind of like this totally universal applicable thing. But yeah, that substance, so that category, you already kind of described it, but it's kind of, okay, how do we have, you know, experience of a unified thing through time? So we have to have a category, so I think this is actually interesting in that the relation with Hume, because this is what Hume denies, that substance is empirical, but Kant agrees with him on this. There's no experience of, you know, a substance there's, you know, bundles, but because we have the category of substance structuring it, although it's not itself something empirical, instead it's the formal structuring, processing of it, then we get an experience of the alteration of properties, but as belonging to this unified object through time. And then cause would then follow, okay, yeah, there's certain, those alterations of substances, those can be understood as following these necessary laws or necessary rules, I guess. And that gives us our understanding of objective sequences and whatnot. I feel like I'm missing something else, but yeah, that seems right?
Yep.
That's helpful. Sorry, Eric, I cut you off.
No, I thought I got it out. If I didn't, if I was in the middle of something, I forgot the second half.
Yeah, that's helpful to think, because that helps him make sense of why it seems like at the beginning of this, it sounds like he's justifying, but I guess he's just kind of reiterating this notion of substance. So then he can use that as a transition into this discussion of cause and effect as having to do, like Eric was saying, with the alteration in properties of substances that they occur according to necessary rules.
The other thing I noticed, this is almost kind of an aside, but towards the end, he's talking about qualities, I think instantaneously apprehended and whatnot. So what he's going on there, I haven't read this in a while, but since like whatever it was 3 weeks ago. But I noticed that what he's, fun fact, what he's talking about there is this earlier section where that's the anticipations of perception. So that, okay, if the analogies of experience, those cover the categories of relation, the anticipations of perception cover the categories of quality. And that's where he talks about extensive and intensive magnitudes. So he's talking about intensive magnitudes, but he's talking about these instantaneous apprehensions that go through degrees. It's not really necessarily important, and it's pretty complex, but at least I can say I somewhat think I understand that. But enough to understand it, to recognize that he was talking about that without actually explaining, oh, I talked about this in this other section. But if you're wondering exactly what the hell's going on when he's talking about these degrees and whatnot, that's what he's talking about. Because he's trying to show how, these categories fit together with experience. So obviously the categories of relation that he's talking about, cause and substance, those can't be, they can't contradict the other categories and how they, as schematisms, work to structure experience, including quality, and the way that gives you extensive magnitudes or intensive magnitudes and all that fun stuff.
Well, that makes me feel not as bad about, there were a couple of pages there where it was just like question mark, question mark, question mark, question mark.
Yeah.
I have no idea what the hell he was talking about.
Yeah, I think for a lot of those, he's talking about these other categories that I can't remember exactly the section title that it's called. It's something analytic exposition of the transcendental deduction. I don't know what the fuck it is. I have to say, Kant's language just like pisses me off sometimes. I don't even really know why. Maybe it's I just can't grasp it. I don't know. I can't really speak in Kantian. I just can't really do it.
Well, I can't speak Deleuzian, so.
Oh, I can do that. Yeah. I mean, there's some, okay, you know what? I'm actually really good at speaking Heideggerian. Although I lose it quite, it's kind of like, okay, all these things, they're like foreign languages. You have to practice them. If you don't practice them, you lose them. So it's that way with Heideggerian for me. If I don't practice it consistently, I'll lose it. Look like I can gain it back pretty soon. But all these things, they're learning these languages, and yeah, but I just can't really get into the Kantian language. I don't know. I'm just constantly, I don't know. I'm in the same boat as you are, Ned, with I never know which word exactly really to use. It's like what appearance? I don't. What is this? I don't know. Something.
Well, they all have such precise meanings, and the shades of difference sometimes can be pretty, well, at least seems to me, can be pretty small. And so, like intuition versus sensation versus, anyway, yes, because I don't doubt that that they don't. It does seem to me they have precise definitions, but
Yeah.
they're so, there's just so much technical vocabulary. Like you said, I guess if I just spent a long time mastering the vocabulary, I could talk and feel like I was making sense, but it's hard.
Yeah, it is. Which, that's not so much like a direct criticism, I think, of Kant. It's more of just a frustration about my ineptitude. Because I think, Kant, I mean, I agree with Alistair. Yeah, there's parts where he's like inconsistent and whatnot, but for the most part, he's pretty consistent. He's definitely knows what he's doing to a large degree. And even I would say Schopenhauer does too, even though he's definitely got so Schopenhauer, I think, is just a lot easier for reading and understanding on a kind of, you don't feel so bogged down by the architectonics of all these things. It's more, see, I don't want to start using the vocabulary to describe the vocabulary, but it's kind of like more intuitive if we just ignore the technical use of intuition as something that, who knows what that even really means? I don't know. I only understand Kant basically, like I have to be like looking at it to understand it. And then just like the next day I'll think about like, oh, what? I can't speak it anymore.
That's definitely how I felt today. Like, I feel like I'm like looking at all these pages and I'm like, I read this and I had some understanding. I read it a week and a half ago and it's just so like gone.
Yeah.
The general ideas are there, but like, it just seems like there's all these nuances. I don't know. I found it very validating that Alistair was just like, oh, if you really want to get into it, it felt like he was kind of just like, oh, Schopenhauer isn't as much of this. But which is not to say that I would personally love to read Kant and really like dive into that and practice the language, so to speak.
You know what? I think
But
if we do end up reading Kant in here, I think we should do the prolegoma to any future metaphysic. Did I get that title right? It's kind of like, the more accessible condensed version of the Critique of Pure Reason.
Also not as consistent and not as clear. The
I was going to say
prolegom-
the same thing. Just go for the critique.
It's usually regarded as like a text on the way to Kant's maturation and referred to clarify some of the points later on, in the critique. Oh, what does he mean this? Well, let's go back and see what his trajectory was. But as a text, it's actually harder to really get a clear picture of what he's trying to talk about.
Damn.
I had a friend who in graduate school had a class where they read all three critiques in one semester. That sounds like a good way to
No,
try
that's
and train.
too soon. That's too quick. You need to digest. You need to digest on it.
Yeah. Okay, so I have this idea for I guess it'd be a horror novel. It'd be kind of in the Lovecraftian kind of the character going insane kind of thing. Okay, this graduate student has to read the Critique of Pure Reason within a week and just completely understand everything about it. And it's this slow descent into absolute insanity as the Critique of Pure Reason becomes much more accessible and understandable, and the language, becomes, but in the process, there's absolute insanity, utter madness, while at the same time grasping pure reason.
So to kind of give a little bit of historical, I mean, about why that would be terrible. Kant himself took a silent decade to fully extricate himself from the Leibnizian Wolffian system and develop his transcendental idealism. It took a full decade for him from his starting point to where he arrived at by the time he reads the Critique of Pure Reason. So an undergraduate philosophy student who probably comes in with all sorts of transcendental realist assumptions and has, you know, like to give them the Critique of Pure Reason and expect them to understand it in a week. I mean, I love it. I love it as a comical, you know, but it's an opportunity for me to point out some of the difficulty we're having wrapping our heads around these ideas. Kant himself had difficulty formulating and wrapping his head around these conclusions and the ways to argue towards these conclusions. But he was led to these conclusions by problems, you know, dialectically, by problems that were already around in his time. And then he, through a silent decade, arrives at this rather significant departure. And so for us, it's still somewhat of a departure, and we don't have a full decade to think it through. So we're you know, some of our difficulty is doing this catch-up job.
Okay. Well,
That also sounds like a defense of Kant's language in his texts.
I think there are issues with Kant, right? But I'm not going to criticize him on his language.
you know, the word architectonic, which I think Kant himself used, right? I think is very apt. You know, it took him, like I said, 10 years to build this cathedral, and it's got lots and lots of details in it. But
so what I'm hearing is that the horror book should be about Kant descending into madness as he constructs his system. That's what I'm hearing.
I once told a philosophy professor of mine in grad school, I said, man, I don't remember what I was reading. He was a big Wittgenstein guy, so maybe it was Wittgenstein, but I said, God, this stuff is driving me crazy. And he looked at me and said, only the good ones go crazy. And it wasn't until I walked out of his office that I realized he had just insulted me.
Yeah.
Well, hey, well, hold on a second. I mean, let's just be real. Nietzsche was not able to achieve that, you know what I mean, by natural means. So he had to go acquire it in the community.
There you go.
Or maybe his.
Talking about syphilis? Sorry, never mind.
That's the allegation.
Yeah, I think that was the reference. Yeah. I kind of want to give a transcendental explanation of the syphilis, though. That was kind of okay. It was because Nietzsche was one of the good ones, and also the syphilis. Those together are what enabled him to be really a good one, as in really fill that and go crazy empirically. Yeah, that's my thesis. Not my actual one. That will never be done.
Oh yeah,
Unless I go crazy.
No thesis statement mentioning here.
Yeah. Sorry, it's been on my mind recently, past 3 years.
Nietzsche having syphilis or something else?
That too, yeah. I do. So okay, as to say, since we're on the topic, so a lot of scholars believe that the syphilis hypothesis is probably wrong, that it was probably something else. I think I can't remember exactly what the other idea is, but it's something like something actually acquired from his father specifically, and it has to do with some kind of like a brain degeneration thing. I can't remember exactly what it's called, but there's people that have questioned that it was, you know, untreated syphilis or whatnot. But who knows?
Well, I ain't gonna go get syphilis.
I mean, you can't know
You're-
that a priori.
You're failing to make science, or to make philosophy experimental and therefore a science.
Hey, I've known for a long time that I am a herd animal, and so I don't have pretensions to greatness. I'm just, one of the herd. Moo.
Make yourself a body without organs and get syphilis. That's what
Well-
philosophy's all about.
On to Schopenhauer then?
Yes.
Okay.
So, on that, I do have a question for the group here. What pace have y'all been setting for yourself as far as like the reading? I only ask because I've not been really good past 2 weeks. One, I thought I was more confident in Kant than I should have been. That's a classic mistake. Two, I've been really busy finding a house. Found a house. Just got back from Nashville today, actually, from that. So now I'm like housing secure, time to read. So what schedule are y'all setting for yourselves personally? Like, are y'all like are y'all like setting up a couple pages a day? Or y'all doing it all at once and then another time later? How are
My
y'all doing?
schedule, Monday, I try to read most of it, and then I usually might end up reading like 3 to 4 pages a day if I haven't finished it on Monday. In an ideal world, I'm able to like do more than half of it on Monday, and then just trickle through to keep it fresh. Review on Thursday.
I try to read it through all at once and then review the day of the seminar, but I'm living free and easy because I'm not teaching this semester. So, and I'm not looking for a house and I'm not working. I'm just, I'm one of those,
Reading Schopenhauer.
one of those lazy college
You should
professors.
try on the Critique of Pure Reason, 1 per week.
Oh God. No, I'm also at the same time, I am trying to develop or at least think about a course in medieval philosophy because it's something I would like to teach and Craig seems interested. So I've been doing a little bit of reading on that stuff. And I think I showed you that big stack of books he gave me. Was that the literature group? Or anyway, I asked him for one book and on medieval philosophy because it was expensive. And this is what I found in my inbox. So Craig apparently is on board with that. So yeah, the Consolations of Philosophy is in there. And so anyway, that's what I've also been doing when I'm not reading Schopenhauer and Dante.
So you've been reading Duns Scotus?
I definitely, I just don't know, when I read the Stanford Encyclopedia article on medieval philosophy, and there's just so many people, because now that's like it's Jewish, Christian, and Islamic philosophy, and there's just like a ton of people. And so I'm not sure what to do. I'm not sure because there's certain people like, Aquinas and Avicenna and people like that you kind of, and then Duns Scotus seems like he has to be in there. But then a lot of people, I've been looking at syllabi and they organize it by topic, so there's like God and freedom and logic and these major topics. So I don't know what I'm going to do. It's just there are so many people.
Yeah, it's kind of sad how medieval philosophy has been relegated, because I'm definitely interested in learning some more. Because, you don't have to, even if you want to understand, 20th century continental stuff. It obviously depends on who. I'll just maybe I can give my own experience, but so you have to understand these one person. It involves going back, having to learn some 19th century people, having to learn early modern people. All these early modern people, I think, just from the reading of Spinoza, you can see how much that, or Descartes, how much that involves all the scholastic stuff as already something that is understood, but as understood as something that clearly went wrong in some way, and that they need to try to surpass and do something novel. that's kind of like the early modern thing, but trying to understand that without any knowledge of medieval philosophy or scholastic philosophy is very different. It's very difficult. So yeah,
the theological context presented them with some really, really difficult problems, you know, like divine omnipotence and human freedom. And some of these, they're very difficult problems, and they were very smart people who worked very hard on these problems. And so even if you're an atheist, you know, looking at the way they approach these problems and the way they tried to solve them is very interesting, and has some, you know, even contemporary value for, you know, questions of compatibilism and things of that sort. And then, like you said, Heidegger didn't he do his thesis on Duns Scotus?
Yeah.
Yeah, and so, and on the, you know, the problem of universals, they worked very hard on that problem. And so, yeah, there's a lot of interesting problems in that era. A lot of interesting approaches.
Yeah, I spent $50 on this book. Nicole Oresme. I have no idea if I'm saying that right. So he was a scholastic philosopher, theologian, scientist, or proto-scientist. So he kind of came up with an influential idea of intensive quantities, which really goes back to Aristotle. So I've been reading this in order to try to understand all this stuff for, sorry to say the word, my thesis, that I'll theoretically complete 1 year. But yeah, I spent $50 on this book. I think that's possibly the most expensive book I've ever bought. Yeah, but it's, once again, these really interesting medieval people that are indeed, there's so many that, so this guy's ideas, which somebody was saying talking about in the chat, they're reminded of something about the medieval void. Ideas with the medieval void.
The discussion,
yeah,
the space thing. I was like, oh, this kind of reminds me of the discussion about void. Like, okay, shit.
Yeah. So I looked up some of that stuff too to try to understand all this, and it's indeed there's a long history of these discussions in scholasticism, and really that's what the categories of modern science come from. That is, they were, you know, there wasn't obviously that distinction between, you know, scientist and philosophy so much. You know, natural philosophy is science. Yeah. And so they were trying to usually doing both. And that's really where modern science came from, is these scholastics trying to work out natural philosophy. And even that, you know, you try to understand something like today, okay, what is, I don't know, degrees? What are, we talk about, you know, quantities and magnitudes of certain things. People just take that as like, oh, it's obvious, just measure something. I don't know. I think to really understand these things, you have to look at the philosophical genealogy of them and be like, oh yeah, there's actually a kind of philosophical debate around these things existing way before their scientific kind of use. And the scientific use is kind of taking categories that came from philosophy, really.
That's it. That
kind
reminds me
of a rant, but okay, yeah.
That reminds me of there's a really good historian named Peter Harrison who did a Gifford series lecture, and he demonstrates in the Gifford series lecture that the development of Christianity was a necessary precondition for our modern science. Specifically, Christianity through the Middle Ages affected a disenchantment of the world, which set the stage for our modern scientific revolution. It flies in the face of who's the guy, the astronomer with the tash that keeps saying things that he couldn't say?
What did you say?
Neil deGrasse Tyson?
Neil deGrasse Tyson.
Yeah.
So Neil deGrasse Tyson, I remember he had the episode The Cosmos, and what he goes, you know, the first scientist was Thales, who deigned to establish a scientific understanding of the world as against a religious understanding of the world. And Neil deGrasse Tyson is talking out of his ass. If you look at, Peter Harrison makes a really strong case that our modern scientific understanding of the world is in some ways an outgrowth of developments in theology that happened through the Middle Ages up to the Renaissance.
Yeah. So I'd say, so Nietzsche also basically has that idea that Christianity was a precondition of modern science.
Right.
But yeah, I agree. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's that's a
Yeah.
commitment to the truth, and then the truth ultimately undermining itself, right? So the highest values devalue themselves, and I think exactly like when I hear that line, that's the first thought that comes to my mind. Christianity, science, whoops, undermining Christianity, but how do we get there?
The advent of nihilism. Good times. So I realized I kind of led us on a sidetrack. I didn't answer Tristan's question. So the way that I usually read this stuff is basically kind of like what Nevid does. You said you read it all the way through kind of one day, and then I'll usually will kind of quickly review it or try to. That's why I'm usually late to these things. The day of, or sometimes the day before. So for Kant, I found Kant, wow, I almost just said Kant there. Freudian slip, maybe. I don't know. So I found it pretty difficult, and I could only get around, I would say, about 12 pages or so, average a day, where I can usually do a little more for other philosophers. I can read, okay, I don't want to sound like I'm bragging or anything, but for Deleuze, I understand his vocabulary pretty well, and he's almost like easy to read now. And I can read like 40 pages a day, like something like that. Spinoza was hard. That was like we did, I think, an average about 15 pages a day. And that took me almost the whole day just about to read that Spinoza, because I try to do it really carefully too. Schopenhauer is much easier than all these people. So I can't remember, what is the average pages we're doing? Is it like 15 or 20 or?
It's around 20 for Schopenhauer.
I think you could definitely do that in one day.
I've read the first couple of selections of Schopenhauer, and he's easy to read in the sense of just readability. The density is all in the ideas, but you don't have to face the problem that you do with some philosophers where figuring out what the sentences are trying to tell you. At least in Schopenhauer, you can read it and it just makes sense on a literary level. And then sometimes I have to sit and pause and go back and reread it, not because I didn't understand it, but because the ideas, I need to work through the ideas. But at least it has that advantage that stylistically, I think it's much easier to read than a lot of the stuff that we have. And I took my one German class, and she said that Nietzsche and Schopenhauer are considered a couple of the best German writers, at least in philosophy.
Yeah, that's what Alistair told me too, or our class or whatever.
Yeah, so cool. I just was I haven't my reading game's been off. I've been doing so much more writing than reading as of late that I feel as if I would assume one tool helps the other, but it just doesn't feel that way to some extent. So yeah, okay, cool. I'm excited to get into this. I haven't read Schopenhauer since undergrad, so that'll be fun.
I wish I had the ability to write more than read. That is exactly what I struggle with. I can easily read, like 100 pages. I can do that in I don't know, 3 days or something. Writing, that takes a long time.
So here's the solution. Chase needs to read all this stuff and then dictate to Tristan, and Tristan can write his thesis. There you go.
Wait, but where's my thesis going to come about for that?
Well, no, Tristan's writing your thesis.
Oh, I see. Okay. All right. I like this idea. All right. All
This
right.
is what
Yeah.
the sciences do. I don't understand why we don't do it in the humanities, but the sciences, it's like, the Chinese room with the monkey. There's like 15 undergraduates in a room doing all of that work. And then the advisor looks over and goes, I approve of this work. And then it counts as a publication for them. I think that's perfectly fine.
I like that idea too.
We should
Yeah.
we should get used to that more.
Okay.
Well,
See you either Monday or Friday.
Nevitt, have you by chance, no one else knew, but have you by chance been able to look at the style paper at all?
I started it and then I kind of forgot about it. So I will go back to it now that all the grading and stuff is done. So
Right.
I'll start looking at that more. I just barely got started on it and then I got distracted. So
Right. No, it's perfectly like I think I may have said in the email in the past, it's like the only thing is that I know the beginning needs work.
uh-huh.
I have not done anything to the beginning since I got it established.
I wrote a long comment on one of the paragraphs, like on the second page or something.
Okay.
And then I did something bad and the comment disappeared and I'm like, fuck this. And that was that's when I stopped working on it. Cause I read this really carefully and I wrote this comment and then I did something and it poof. Like,
Yeah.
Damn it.
Straight into the void.
Yep. Straight into the void. And so that was so demoralizing that I didn't go back to it. But I think I've recovered from that experience now. So I can go back and do it again.
Yeah, I'm trying to use it as it or something else as a writing sample going into the. So yeah, I know where it needs work, and it needs the majority of all my comments are about the beginning, and that's good. The more I get from there, the better for me, and I know that I need to go back and rework that. So it's so that's the big thing, and then also I don't want to tease anything else out, but like I just, if you're like, there's nothing changed here, like, can you put your comments in, like, just know, I think yes, nothing's changed there because I didn't make any changes. I didn't try to. I tried finishing the damn thing before I could go back and do any edits.
That makes sense.
Yeah, I wanted to get riding the bike before I put a stick in front of it.
Yeah, before you put a stick in your wheel.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
Okay. I will definitely get back to that then.
okay. Well, I appreciate it.
Okay. You bet. Bye-bye.